The morning started like any other. 73-year-old Dorothy Miles buttoned her soft blue sweater, slipped her insurance card into her purse, and took her slow, careful walk down the front steps. Her knees ached. They always did when the weather changed. "That's arthritis for you," she joked to her daughter Renee. Today's appointment was routine. Just a checkup, maybe a new prescription for joint pain. The waiting room was cold, as always. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. Dorothy nodded politely to the nurse at the counter. "Morning, sweetheart. I'm here for my 10 o'clock with Dr. Singh." The nurse smiled, checked the screen, and said, "Yes, ma'am. Please have a seat. He'll be right with you." When Dr. Singh entered, his expression was serious, too serious. He closed the door gently, pulled up a chair, and said, "Mrs. Miles, I know this must be difficult." Dorothy frowned. "Difficult? What are you talking about?" He turned the computer screen toward her. It showed her name, Dorothy E. Miles, age 73, and beneath it, in bold letters, diagnosis, stage 2 ovarian carcinoma. Dorothy blanked at the screen. "Excuse me?" Dr. Singh hesitated. "Your biopsy results came in from the regional lab. I know this isn't the news you were expecting." She stared at him. "You're right, it's not, because I never had a biopsy." He looked confused. "You didn't?" "No, sir," she said, voice trembling. "I came here for my knees. I never had any test like that." Dr. Singh's brow furrowed. "That can't be. The system shows the report filed under your name, with your insurance number. The scan ID matches your profile." "My insurance number," Dorothy said softly. "How's that possible?" He turned the screen again, scrolling through digital notes, lab reports, blood work, even a treatment plan scheduled for next week. Her pulse quickened. "That's not mine. That's not my life." The doctor looked at her, then at the screen, then back at her again. He rubbed his temple. "Let me check something." Minutes turned into an hour as staff ran back and forth, whispering in hallways, clicking through files. Finally, a young nurse returned, eyes uneasy. "Mrs. Miles, can I just confirm, you've never been to Mercy West Hospital?" "Mercy West?" Dorothy shook her head. "Never heard of it." The nurse looked at the clipboard. "That's where your biopsy was processed." Dorothy laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Baby, I can't even pronounce half the words in that report, much less afford that hospital." By the time her daughter Renee arrived, Dorothy was sitting alone in the exam room, her sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. "Mama?" Renee asked, stepping in. "What's going on?" Dorothy's voice cracked. "They say I got cancer." Renee froze. "What?" "That's what their computer says, but it's not me, baby. It's somebody else. They put somebody else's sickness in my name." Renee grabbed the printout from the counter. Two women's names stared back at her. Similar, but not the same. Dorothy E. Miles and Dorothea L. Miles. Same birth year, same state. One small difference the computer had ignored. Renee marched to the front desk, holding the paper up. "This isn't my mother's record. You mixed her up with someone else." The receptionist frowned. "Ma'am, the system confirmed a positive match through facial recognition and insurance ID." Renee's voice rose. "The system is wrong." "I understand your frustration," the woman said calmly. "But all our data comes from CareMatch AI. It's 99.6% accurate." Renee stared at her. "Well, my mother just became the .4." Back home that night, Dorothy sat quietly on the couch, her eyes fixed on the printout. "I keep thinking about that poor woman, whoever she is," she whispered. "The one who really has it. I hope she's getting treated." Renee nodded. "She will, but we need to make sure they take your name off that file before they start sending bills." Dorothy sighed. They already did send one, for a treatment I never had. Renee's jaw tightened. Then we're not letting this go. As the evening news played faintly in the background, Dorothy spoke softly, almost to herself. You know, baby, when I was young, they used to mix up our school files, said we all looked alike. I never thought I'd live to see a computer make the same mistake. Renee took her mother's hand. That's exactly why we're going to fix this, so they remember you're not just data. Dorothy Miles walked into the clinic looking for relief from arthritis. Instead, she walked into a system that confused recognition with understanding. The machine didn't just make a typo, it rewrote her story. And for the first time in her life, she saw what it meant to be mistaken by design. Next, Renee learns how this could happen and how the system that promised to protect patients started merging lives that only looked the same on paper. The next morning, Renee sat at her mother's kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and her laptop open. The air smelled faintly of toast and menthol rub, the scent of routine, not chaos. But Dorothy's world had been turned upside down. They said it was a mistake, Renee muttered, typing furiously. But a mistake doesn't print your name on a cancer report. Dorothy sat across from her, quiet, hands folded over her robe. I've lived 73 years, she said softly. Had bills, traffic tickets, even a jury summons once. But I ain't never been somebody else before. Renee gave a small smile. You're still you, Mama. We just need to make sure the computer remembers that. She began researching the system the clinic used, CareMatch AI, an identity verification platform hospitals adopted to reduce human error. According to its glossy website, the software could link patient records with over 99% accuracy by using facial scans, insurance data, and AI-driven biometric matching. Renee frowned. Facial scans? Since when do they need faces to check blood pressure? She clicked on a promotional video. Doctor smiling, a narrator's smooth voice saying, no more duplicate records, no more confusion, one identity, one patient. But when she scrolled further down, the fine print told a different story. Accuracy rates may vary depending on image quality, age, and skin tone range. She read it twice. Skin tone range? Later that day, she called the hospital IT department. A man answered with the usual polite tone of someone used to angry callers. Ma'am, the system automatically merges files that score above 95% match probability, he explained. If two records share the same initials, birthday, and facial metrics, they're treated as the same patient. So the computer saw my mother's face and someone else's and decided they were close enough? Well, he said carefully, AI models can sometimes misread darker skin tones due to contrast ratios. Renee nearly dropped the phone. You mean it couldn't tell two black women apart? The man hesitated. We're aware of some inconsistencies, but it's rare. Not rare enough, Renee snapped. That evening, she showed her mother an article she found from a medical technology journal. Facial recognition models trained primarily on light-skin data perform less accurately on darker complexions, with error rates as high as 34% among older adults. Renee shook her head. They built a system that can tell white twins apart, but not two grandmothers from Georgia. Dorothy looked down at her tea. So it didn't see me wrong, it just didn't see me at all. A few days later, Renee returned to the clinic to meet with Dr. Singh again. He looked weary, like a man carrying more guilt than authority. I checked your mother's file again, he said. It was merged automatically last month after a data sync with Mercy West Hospital. How can that happen? The AI scans all systems for possible duplicates. It matched her insurance ID to another woman with a similar name. The algorithm treats that as the same identity unless someone manually rejects it. Renee frowned. So no one checked? He shook his head. The program doesn't ask us to. It trusts itself. Dorothy, sitting quietly in the chair, spoke for the first time. That's the problem, baby. It trusts itself too much. When they got home, Renee wrote everything down. AI used to merge records automatically. Older, darker faces misread as duplicates. No human review before changes go live. Hospitals save time, patients pay the price. She read the list aloud to her mother. Dorothy said, "Sounds like progress forgot its manners." That night, Renee couldn't sleep. She stared at her laptop screen, scrolling through forums where doctors discussed the same system. One comment stopped her cold. CareMatch speeds up workflow but can't distinguish between certain demographics. We call it shadow merging. Shadow merging. Renee whispered the phrase to herself. That's what they did to Mama. They merged her shadow. The next day, Renee visited the clinic's administrative office and demanded to see the CareMatch representative. A young man in a gray suit met her in the lobby, full of corporate charm. "Our algorithm learns from millions of records," he said. "It improves accuracy over time." "Improves for who?" Renee asked. "Because my mother's not getting any safer while your computer's learning." He gave a polite laugh. "Ma'am, we're committed to fairness, but technology can't be perfect." Renee stared at him. "Then maybe it shouldn't be making life and death decisions until it can." That evening, she found her mother sitting by the window, watching the sunset. The light touched Dorothy's face, soft, golden, real. Renee said quietly, "Mama, I think I understand now. The computer didn't mean to hurt you. It just doesn't know the difference between data and dignity." Dorothy smiled faintly. "Then we'll teach it." CareMatch promised hospitals efficiency. It promised patients accuracy. But what it delivered was a quiet kind of danger, one that came from a system built to see patterns, not people. It wasn't that the machine got Dorothy wrong. It was that it never really saw her to begin with. Next, Dorothy and Renee confront the painful truth. The system didn't just confuse her name. It assigned her another woman's illness, her treatment, and even her medical debt. When the phone rang that afternoon, Dorothy almost didn't answer. She was still shaken from the week before, still trying to convince herself it had all been a misunderstanding. But when she picked up, the voice on the other end froze her in place. "Mrs. Miles, this is billing from Mercy West Oncology. We're calling to confirm your next chemotherapy session for Tuesday." Dorothy's hand went cold. "My what?" "Your treatment," the voice repeated. "You missed your first appointment, so we've rescheduled." "Ma'am," Dorothy interrupted, her voice trembling, "I think you've got the wrong person." There was a pause. "Is this Dorothy E. Miles, born April 12, 1961? "Yes," she said slowly. "But I don't have cancer. I've never even been to your hospital." The line went silent for a moment before the clerk said softly, "According to our records, you do." Dorothy hung up. When Renee got home that evening, she found her mother sitting on the couch, phone still in hand. "Mama, what's wrong?" "They called me again," Dorothy whispered. "Said my chemo's on Tuesday." Renee's stomach tightened. "That's not possible. I told them to delete that record." Dorothy looked at her daughter with watery eyes. "They won't, baby. The computer says it's me." The next day, they drove to the hospital in person. Renee marched up to the front desk, her mother's ID in one hand and the wrong bill in the other. "I need to speak to someone from records," she said firmly. A woman appeared from a back office, her tone polite but distant, the tone of someone used to explaining the unexplainable. "Your mother's file shows multiple visits to this hospital," she said. "Lab work, imaging, prescriptions." Renee interrupted. "You're reading about someone else. My mother has never set foot here." The woman turned the screen toward them. On it was a photo, a woman roughly Dorothy's age, similar build, same soft gray hair, but not her. Renee leaned in. "That's not my mother." The clerk frowned. "Our system says it's a 99.8% match." Dorothy's voice broke. "So she's the one who's sick, and I'm the one they're sending the bill to." They sat in the car afterward, both silent. Finally, Dorothy said quietly, "It's a strange thing, being mistaken for someone else's pain." Renee gripped the steering wheel. "It's more than strange, Mama. It's dangerous." That night, Renee spent hours on the phone with hospital administrators, insurance agents, and even a lawyer friend. Everyone gave her the same answer: "We'll investigate." But investigations take time, and bills don't wait. The next week, another letter arrived. This one listed a balance of $18,422.56 for ovarian cancer treatment, stage 2. Dorothy stared at the envelope, her face pale. "I can't even afford my arthritis pills," she said softly. "Now they think I owe them for a disease I don't even have." Renee's voice shook. "They made a mistake, Mama, and we're going to make them fix it." 2 days later, Dorothy received a voicemail from her insurance company. "Mrs. Miles, your coverage adjustment for oncology services is complete. Please note your new deductible effective immediately." She sank into her chair, clutching the phone. The computer hadn't just stolen her name. It had rewritten her health, her finances, her future. When Renee called the insurance company, the agent sounded apologetic but helpless. "The data comes directly from the hospital feed," she explained. "If they reported a cancer diagnosis, we have to honor it." "So no one checks?" Renee asked. "Ma'am," the woman said, "the system confirms everything automatically." Renee almost laughed, the bitter kind of laugh that sits somewhere between rage and exhaustion. Later that evening, Dorothy sat by the window, staring out at the streetlights. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, older somehow. "I keep thinking about that other woman," she said softly, "the one they mixed me up with. She must be scared too. And if they think I'm her, then who's taking care of her?" Renee swallowed hard. "We'll find out, Mama." Dorothy smiled faintly. "You always were the fighter." That night, Renee wrote a post on social media with a photo of her mother holding the bill. "My 73-year-old mother was misdiagnosed with cancer because an AI system merged her record with another woman's. They billed her, changed her insurance, and refused to fix it because the algorithm was 99% sure. Efficiency without humanity is negligence." The post spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, thousands of people were sharing similar stories: mistaken records, mixed up medications, wrong bills. A new hashtag was born. Hashtag I am not your data. The next morning, Dorothy woke to dozens of messages from strangers. Some offered prayers. Others shared horror stories. One message read, "They gave me someone else's allergy list. I ended up in the ER." Dorothy read quietly, then looked at her daughter. "Seems like the whole world's got the wrong diagnosis," she said. Renee nodded. "Then maybe it's time we prescribe the cure." Dorothy's story wasn't an isolated error. It was part of a pattern, one that treated people as numbers to be sorted, matched, and merged. The machine didn't care who was who, only that the system looked tidy. But beneath every perfect record was a human being, and a heartbeat the computer never learned to hear. Next, Renee uncovers what the hospital never told her, that they'd known about the mix-ups for months, and that the system's racial error margin was an open secret. The hospital lobby smelled faintly of bleach and coffee, that strange mix of cleanliness and exhaustion. Renee walked in with her mother's folder tucked under her arm, the bills, the screenshots, the printouts. Dorothy followed slowly behind, cane in hand, her composure as neat and steady as her Sunday church hat. They had an appointment with the hospital's patient technology liaison, a title that sounded like it meant help, but usually meant paperwork. The man who greeted them wore a badge that read, J. Nichols, Systems Integration Specialist. He smiled politely, too politely, and gestured for them to sit. Mrs. Miles, he began. First, we want to apologize for any distress this issue has caused. Renee leaned forward. Distress is what happens when your flight's delayed, Mr. Nichols. This is identity theft by computer. He hesitated, then folded his hands. The merge issue is very rare. Our system has safeguards. Dorothy raised an eyebrow. You mean the same safeguards that told me I have cancer? Nichols cleared his throat. Ma'am, our data shows a 99% match rate accuracy. And my mother's the 1% you decided to gamble with? Renee interrupted. Tell me how that's safe. Nichols turned the laptop screen toward them, showing a tangle of charts and lines. These are biometric match indicators, he said. Your mother's facial metrics, voice pattern, and insurance data aligned almost perfectly with another patient's file. Dorothy frowned. So because I look like somebody, I'm now somebody else? It's a mathematical correlation, not a personal one, he said awkwardly. Renee snapped. A mathematical what? You turned my mother into an equation and called it care? He exhaled, forcing a sympathetic smile. I understand your frustration. No, Renee said, her voice sharp. You understand your script. When the meeting ended, Nichols handed her a pamphlet titled Understanding AI in Modern Medicine. Renee didn't even look at it. She dropped it in the trash on their way out. Out in the parking lot, Dorothy leaned against the car door. You know what's funny, baby? What? They used to make mistakes because people weren't paying attention. Now they make mistakes because computers don't. Renee gave a small, tired laugh. And the worst part? The people in charge pretend they can't tell the difference. 2 days later, a reporter from the Atlanta Tribune called. She'd seen Renee's post about the mix-up. We're hearing this isn't isolated, she said. Would you and your mother be willing to talk on record? Renee hesitated. We're not looking for attention. The reporter replied, You're not, but the people who built that system need it. The story ran the following week with the headline, When AI Confuses Black Patients for Each Other, the Hidden Cost of Efficiency. It quoted hospital staff anonymously admitting the issue wasn't no. One technician said, We've known the algorithm doesn't perform well on darker skin tones. We were told to monitor, not fix. Another added, When I brought it up, I was told, that's a vendor issue. Renee stared at the article, her hands trembling with both anger and vindication. They knew, she whispered. They've known. Within a week, the hospital called again, this time from the legal department. A woman with a clipped, professional tone said, Mrs. Miles, we're reaching out to assure you we're conducting a full review. Renee took the call on speaker. A review, she said? You mean damage control. Ma'am, we're working with CareMatch to retrain their algorithm for greater demographic balance. Dorothy spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Sweetheart, you don't need to retrain it, you need to teach it manners. The lawyer paused. Sorry? Dorothy continued. Because it's one thing to make a mistake, it's another to act like you don't see who you hurt. That night, Renee was invited to a televised panel about AI in healthcare. She nearly turned it down, but her mother said, Go, baby, make them listen. On live TV, under bright lights, she said, My mother's face was mistaken for someone else's illness. They call it a data merge. I call it being erased. You can't automate care if you can't even recognize who you're caring for. Her words spread faster than she imagined. Within days, lawmakers and activists started asking questions about CareMatch and its federal approval process. Back at home, Dorothy watched her daughter on TV, pride glistening in her eyes. She's got my stubborn, she said softly. Her neighbor, Miss Clara, who'd stopped by to bring cornbread, nodded. She's got your grace, too. I just hope those folks know who they're messing with. Dorothy smiled. They will. Hospitals called it innovation. Politicians called it progress. But for people like Dorothy Miles, progress came with paperwork, apologies, and a quiet kind of humiliation. The system's mistake wasn't just technical, it was moral. Because when convenience outweighs care, you don't just lose accuracy, you lose accountability. Next, Renee finds the proof she needs, leaked internal memos that reveal the hospital knew their software had racial variance errors months before Dorothy's diagnosis ever appeared. The email came late at night. Renee was sitting at her desk, scrolling through messages from reporters when a new one appeared in her inbox with no subject line, just an attachment. The message read, "You don't know me, but you were right. They knew." The attached file was a PDF labeled Internal Evaluation Care Match Racial Accuracy Audit. Her hands shook as she opened it. Page 1 was full of graphs, percentages, and bureaucratic words like variance margin and predictive deviation. But buried in the middle of the document was one simple, horrifying line. Error rate and patient identification 0.4% overall. Error rate in African American patients 11.7%. Recommendation: postpone disclosure until public relations review. Renee stared at the screen, her stomach twisting. They didn't fix it, they buried it. She printed the report and drove to her mother's house first thing in the morning. Dorothy was still in her robe, sipping coffee, Bible open beside her. Renee laid the pages on the table. "What's this?" Dorothy asked. "It's the proof," Renee said quietly. "The hospital knew their system mixed up black patients way more often. They just didn't tell anybody." Dorothy's eyes moved over the numbers. 11%, she said softly. "That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." Renee nodded. "They called it racial variance, like it's just another setting you can toggle off." Later that day, Renee met with Dr. Singh. He looked at the papers in disbelief. "I had no idea," he said. "We were told the system passed every audit." "It did," Renee replied, "just not the honest ones." Dr. Singh sighed, rubbing his forehead. "This explains everything. I've had other patients, black women mostly, whose lab results didn't match their symptoms. I thought it was clerical error." Renee gave him a look. It was systemic error. He nodded, "And that's worse." That evening, Renee emailed the report to a journalist from the Atlanta Tribune and attached a simple note. "If they can mislabel my mother's body, they can mislabel anyone's." By the next morning, the headline was everywhere. Leaked documents reveal hospital knew AI misidentified black patients. The article quoted the audit line that had kept Renee awake all night. Postpone disclosure until public relations review. Cable news picked it up. Health advocates called it digital discrimination. Civil rights attorneys called it algorithmic negligence. When the reporters came knocking, the hospital's PR department released a short statement. While there were known discrepancies in early software testing, corrective updates have since been deployed. Renee read it out loud to her mother. Corrective updates? That's their way of saying, "We hoped you'd never find out." Dorothy sighed. They still using words to hide what they did. But that's all right. The truth's louder now. The next day, a Senate subcommittee announced an investigation into CareMatch's contracts with federal hospitals. Reporters camped outside the company's headquarters, shouting questions. When asked about the racial variance data, the CEO said, "We regret that earlier versions of our model did not fully represent all demographic groups." Renee shook her head. "They talk about us like we're optional." Soon after, another whistleblower reached out. This time, it was an internal email thread between executives discussing the same audit. From VP of Product Compliance, "Team, audit shows significant bias in darker skin detection. fix will require retraining with new datasets. From CEO, not worth delay. Launch first, fix later. Renee read it twice, each word sinking deeper like a stone. Mama, she whispered, they knew before the first patient ever logged in. Dorothy looked at her daughter, eyes steady. And now the whole world knows too. By the end of the week, the hospital's board suspended all use of CareMatch AI. They issued refunds to hundreds of misidentified patients and sent out letters of apology. Dorothy received one in the mail, printed on thick paper with embossed lettering. We sincerely regret any confusion this may have caused. She laughed. Confusion? They tried to give me someone else's death sentence. That's more than confusion. Renee smirked. They don't have a word for what it really is, Mama. That's why we're going to make one. That night, Renee went live on social media, holding up the leaked memo for the world to see. Her voice was calm, deliberate. This isn't about my mother anymore, she said. It's about every person who's been erased, mislabeled, or replaced by a computer that never learned to care. If your system can't tell us apart, it doesn't deserve to touch our names. The video went viral within hours. Hashtag I am not your data was now trending in 5 countries. The paper trail told the truth. Technology couldn't hide. That progress without fairness isn't progress at all. The hospital didn't make a mistake. It made a choice. It chose speed over safety, profit over people, precision over personhood. And in the spaces between those numbers, human lives disappeared. Next, Renee joins other families in a national movement to demand accountability, one that leads to Congress drafting the Patient Identity Protection Act, the first law of its kind to make equity a legal requirement for every healthcare algorithm in America. By the time the story hit national television, Dorothy's face had become a symbol. Not for fame, not for attention, but for truth. News anchors repeated her name the way people used to say Rosa Parks, soft but certain, a reminder that quiet dignity can start a movement. The reports came pouring in from all corners of the country. An elderly man in Chicago said his hospital chart showed a heart surgery he never had. A woman in Texas opened her portal and found her record replaced with a stranger's prescription for epilepsy. In Detroit, a nurse discovered 2 patients with identical digital IDs, one living, one already deceased. Each story sounded impossible until it wasn't. Renee began collecting testimonies in a shared folder online. Within a week, there were hundreds. Each line carried the same theme. They said I was someone else. One message read, "They sent me a condolence letter addressed to my son. He's alive. We had to prove it." Another said, "The AI matched me to a woman in Florida. We have the same last name. That's it." Renee scrolled through the messages late into the night, her mother sitting beside her in silence. Dorothy finally said, "Baby, it's not just me, is it?" Renee shook her head. It never was. Community groups began forming under a shared banner, the Patient Equity Network. They met in church basements, community centers, even libraries, places where faith and justice had always found shelter. At one meeting, an older man stood up, his voice shaky but firm. "They used to say we didn't belong in certain neighborhoods," he said. "Now they're saying we don't belong in our own medical charts." The room murmured in agreement. Renee and her mother attended one of the first town halls on the issue in Atlanta. Reporters packed the pews. Doctors sat next to patients. Even a few hospital administrators came, stiff in their suits, trying not to look uncomfortable. Dorothy was the last to speak. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane. Her voice was soft but steady. "I came here for arthritis," she said, "and I left with cancer, but it wasn't mine. And when I told them they were wrong, they told me the computer couldn't be." She paused, letting the silence settle. "Well, I'm here to tell you something. I've seen a lot of smart machines in my lifetime, But I've never seen one that knows right from wrong." The crowd rose to its feet. Applause rolled through the hall like thunder. The next day, footage of her speech aired on national news. Viewers saw not just her words, but the expression on her face, proud, tired, and still standing. For once, a black grandmother wasn't being pitied or ignored. She was being heard. Soon, the movement reached Washington. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle began drafting proposals for oversight and reform. Civil rights leaders compared it to the early battles over voter suppression, an invisible form of exclusion wrapped in polite language. A headline in the Washington Post read, "Algorithmic bias in healthcare becomes the new civil rights issue." Renee clipped the article and stuck it to her refrigerator. Under it, she wrote in black marker, "If they can't see us clearly, we'll make them look harder." Meanwhile, families who'd suffered from the same system began filing lawsuits. One in particular caught national attention. A family in Florida sued after their grandmother was mistakenly marked deceased by the AI registry, causing her Social Security and insurance to stop. When asked for comment, the hospital said only, "We regret the system error." Dorothy read the article and shook her head. They always regret, but regret don't fix the damage. Renee sighed. That's why we're going to make them responsible. A few weeks later, the first public demonstration took place outside the Department of Health and Human Services. Hundreds of people stood holding signs that read, "We are not data. Our faces are not optional. Technology needs a conscience." Renee spoke on the steps, her mother by her side. "Machines can process millions of records in seconds," she said, "but somehow they keep forgetting the same faces, the same neighborhoods. This isn't just about accuracy, it's about acknowledgement." Her mother squeezed her hand. That night, back home, Dorothy sat quietly at the kitchen table. The TV played softly in the background. More news, more talking heads. But she wasn't watching. She was thinking. "Baby," she said, "you think they'll listen this time?" Renee looked at her. "They have to. You made them see it." Dorothy smiled faintly. "Good, because I'm tired of being invisible in rooms I paid to walk into." Dorothy's story became the spark for something larger, a reckoning with the systems we trust to save us. It wasn't just about one patient or one computer or one mistake. It was about the quiet erasures that happen when data replaces dignity. The technology had been built to see everyone, and somehow it still didn't. Next, Renee and her allies take their fight to Congress, where they push for a new kind of accountability. Not just fixing the code, but rewriting the laws that allow machines to misread humanity. The hearing room on Capitol Hill was colder than it needed to be. Rows of polished desks faced the front, where a panel of lawmakers sat beneath a sign that read, "Committee on Health and Technology Oversight." It was standing room only. Reporters, doctors, patients, and, tucked among them, Dorothy and her daughter Renee. Dorothy wore her best Sunday suit and the same blue hat she'd worn to church for years. Renee stood behind her, notes in hand, voice steady but eyes tired. When her name was called, she walked to the microphone. "Good morning," she began, voice echoing softly across the room. "My name is Renee Miles. My mother came here today because she's living proof that technology without accountability isn't progress, it's neglect." She paused, looked toward the committee. "Last year, a hospital computer told my 73-year-old mother she had ovarian cancer. She didn't. Another woman did. But because the system couldn't tell two black women apart, my mother got the diagnosis and the bill." The room fell silent. She had to prove her own innocence to a machine. One of the senators, a woman with silver hair and a sharp voice, leaned forward. "Ms. Miles, what would you want us to do?" Renee looked her straight in the eye. "Make fairness the law, not a promise." Over the next 3 hours, witnesses testified. Doctors admitted they'd relied too heavily on automation. Experts presented research showing higher AI error rates among darker-skinned patients. Advocates argued that companies like CareMatch had profited off the illusion of perfection. By the end, the committee chair cleared his throat and announced what everyone knew was coming: the Patient Identity Protection Act. Its first draft included 4 key provisions. 1. Human review mandate. No AI can merge or modify medical records without human verification. 2. Equity testing. All healthcare software must prove accuracy across age, race, and income groups before use. 3. Transparency rule. Every hospital must disclose when AI assists in patient identification. 4. The Miles Clause. Every patient has the right to be correctly seen, recorded, and remembered. When the committee voted, the result was unanimous. Applause broke out in the chamber, restrained at first, then louder. Renee felt her knees go weak. Dorothy reached for her hand and whispered, "Told you they'd listen." Outside, cameras flashed. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Miles, how does it feel to have a law named after you?" Dorothy smiled. "Honey, I didn't set out to make laws. I just wanted my name back." Another reporter asked, "Do you forgive the hospital?" She thought for a moment. "I don't know if forgiveness fixes data, but I know it fixes hearts." Weeks later, the bill passed both houses of Congress. The president signed it into law with Dorothy and Renee standing beside him. He handed Dorothy the pen, saying, "Mrs. Miles, your story reminded this country that identity is sacred. We can't heal people we refuse to see." Dorothy smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Well, I'm glad I could help the computer learn some manners." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Back home in Atlanta, news crews waited outside their porch for an interview. Dorothy sat on her rocking chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. "They asked me if I trust the system now," she told the camera. "And I said, no. But I trust that somebody's watching it." She paused, her voice soft but firm. "Machines don't have souls, but the people behind them do. And now, those souls are on record." Over the next few months, hospitals across the country began adding human-verified labels to patient files. Posters appeared in waiting rooms. "Protected by the Miles Clause, because every life deserves its own record." For the first time in decades, Dorothy felt a strange sense of calm walking into her clinic. The nurse smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Miles. Welcome back." Dorothy grinned. Nice to be seen. That evening, Renee and her mother watched the news together. The anchor announced that the Miles Clause have reduced misidentification errors by 82% nationwide. Dorothy nodded slowly. "You see that? They fixed the numbers. Now maybe they'll start fixing the people." Renee smiled. "You started that, Mama." Dorothy chuckled. "All I did was show up and stay put until they saw me." When history looks back, the Miles Clause won't just be remembered as a policy. It'll be remembered as a promise that the right to exist, to be recognized, isn't a privilege of technology. It's the foundation of care itself. Because progress doesn't mean replacing people, it means respecting them. Next, Dorothy returns to her community clinic, not as a patient, but as a teacher, helping others understand how to protect their medical identities and make sure no one else has to prove they're real. The community clinic was buzzing that morning, not with sickness, but with something rarer. Rows of folding chairs filled the waiting room, a table of cookies in the corner, and a new sign on the wall that read in teal letters, "The Miles Clause. Every patient seen, every record verified. At the front of the room stood Dorothy Miles, cane in one hand, microphone in the other. Her daughter, Renee, sat in the front row, grinning like a proud child at a graduation. Dorothy looked out at the faces before her. Some anxious, some curious, most just tired of being invisible. "I'm not here to talk fancy," she began. "I'm here to talk about what happens when the system forgets your name, and what you can do to remind it." The crowd chuckled softly. "You see, I went to my doctor for arthritis," she continued, "and a computer told me I had cancer. It wasn't true, but I had to fight like it was, just to prove who I was." She paused, eyes glistening. "I don't blame the machine for not knowing me. I blame the people who built it and didn't think they needed to." She walked slowly to the edge of the small stage, resting on her cane. "Technology can scan your face, but it can't see your story. It can read your blood pressure, but it can't feel your fear." "That's why the Miles clause matters," she said. "It makes sure someone, a real living person, checks that your name, your record, your care are really yours." After her talk, a woman approached her. Early 60s, gentle smile, tear in her eye. "Mrs. Miles," she said, "they mixed up my file too. Said I had diabetes. I didn't. Took me months to fix it." Dorothy took her hand. "And now you know. You don't have to beg for correction. It's your right." The woman nodded. "Because of you." Dorothy smiled. "Because of all of us who stopped letting silence do the talking." Later that afternoon, Dorothy and Renee sat outside the clinic under the shade of an oak tree. A young nurse brought them lemonade and snapped a photo for the clinic's newsletter. On the screen, Dorothy saw her reflection, tired but content, framed by sunlight. "That's a good picture," Renee said. Dorothy laughed. "It's the first one in years where I don't look like I'm waiting for someone to fix something." A few months later, hospitals across the country began celebrating Miles Day, a day dedicated to patient transparency and dignity in healthcare. Each facility hosted free workshops on protecting your records and understanding your digital rights. On TV, a short public service announcement aired during evening news hours. Brought to you by the Miles Clause, reminding America that care begins with recognition. Dorothy's voice was in it, calm, measured, familiar. Machines don't give care. People do. And every name matters, including yours. That night, sitting on her porch, Dorothy watched the clip play on the local station. She shook her head, smiling. "Never thought I'd end up between the weather and the lottery numbers." Renee laughed. "Mama, you're the headline now." Dorothy chuckled. "Well, good. Maybe somebody out there will remember to double-check a file before they double-charge a grandma." A week later, Renee brought home a letter, cream-colored, with a government seal. Dorothy opened it carefully. "Mrs. Miles, in recognition of your contribution to healthcare reform and patient advocacy, you are hereby awarded the Presidential Medal for Citizen Leadership." Her hands trembled. "Mercy, they're giving me a medal for surviving a mistake." Renee smiled. "Not just surviving, Mama, changing what survival means." That Sunday at church, the congregation gave her a standing ovation. Her pastor said, "The good Lord didn't let the machine define her. He used her to redefine the machine." Dorothy simply said, "Amen." In her final public talk months later, she ended with a line that would echo long after the camera stopped recording. "Justice doesn't always arrive in handcuffs. Sometimes it comes with a signature and a promise that no one else will be made invisible." Back home, before bed, Dorothy looked at the small frame on her nightstand, a copy of the law signed and sealed beneath a photo of her and Renee smiling outside the Capitol. The caption read, "The Miles Clause, 2035, because no one should have to prove they're themselves." she whispered softly. They finally saw me. Dorothy Miles came to the clinic seeking relief from pain. Instead, she found purpose. Her courage became law, her name became protection, and her story became a mirror, showing what happens when technology forgets to care. Because in a world ruled by algorithms, she reminded us of something deeper. Recognition isn't just technical, it's human. Dedicated to every patient who had to prove they existed. If this story moved you, share it. Someone you love might still be waiting. Subscribe to Older Black Person Stories when data meets dignity for more true stories of courage, reform, and the people who remind technology who it's supposed to serve.